Hello everybody, I am GeneaVlogger, and on today's video, I will be discussing which DNA test website is the best for genealogy. For this video, I will be discussing 5 DNA tests: 23andMe, AncestryDNA, Family Tree DNA, Living DNA, and MyHeritage. I chose these 5 because these were the websites where you could buy an autosomal SNP DNA test and be able to do genetic matching. This ranking will be based on the usefulness of each website for genealogy, so I won't be considering any of the features like traits, health, the Neanderthal stuff, or anything similar. Each ranking will be based on what genealogically relevant tools each website has, as well as what features they have to help in genealogy research. In 5th place is Living DNA, the newest company of this entire list. Living DNA's biggest genealogical benefit is the ancestral admixture results for their specialist ancestries, giving more specific breakdowns for people from around the world, but with a primary focus on England and Ireland. Their African and Asian breakdowns are much more nuanced than the other tests in this list, but there is a question of accuracy. And that question of accuracy is compounded by the fact that I couldn't find a white paper for the company. Living DNA also includes maternal and paternal haplogroups with their DNA tests, but only when you buy the DNA test, not by uploading. But the only other company to offer that with their autosomal SNP DNA test is 23andMe. But even if these more sub-regional breakdowns are somewhat accurate, it doesn't change much because the ethnicity admixture is one of the least genealogically useful tools from DNA websites. The power truly comes from genetic matches, and this is really where Living DNA lacks. The first big negative with Living DNA is they're the smallest database out of this list at only about 300,000 people in their database. They have a very basic match review page offering barely any information, and honestly, the page feels quite bare. I couldn't find a way to connect a family tree or list any family information, although the website says they are in the works of creating a new family tree feature. And overall, Living DNA just lacks any sort of advanced DNA tools. It'll be interesting to see as they start to roll out features they've talked about to the public, but until then, the only real reason to get a Living DNA test, in my opinion, is if you want that more granular breakdown if you are from either England or Ireland or Africa or Asia. There's still just that question of how well does it actually perform. Otherwise, the only big reason I'd see getting into the Living DNA database, which I should say you can upload your DNA to Living DNA, but getting in as many DNA databases as possible is really helpful genealogically because you never know what DNA match might be in one database, and if you don't test in that database, you'll never match with them. In 4th place is Family Tree DNA. Now, I actually had a little bit of difficulty putting Family Tree DNA this far back in the list, especially being that this was the first place that I ever tested back in 2013. But a big part of the reason for putting them this far back is because this ranking is based solely on the autosomal SNP DNA tests. And where Family Tree DNA really stands out from the other websites is the fact that they offer in-depth Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing. But since we're not considering those, it unfortunately drops Family Tree back to this 4th spot. One of the best genealogy features for Family Tree DNA is the ease of adding family information in a family tree that matches can see. You can also link genetic matches to your tree on Family Tree DNA, which will then allow the system to phase matches between your maternal and paternal side, even including a both option, which is useful for endogamous populations or people that might have relatives through both sides of the family. Family Tree DNA also has some decent advanced tools for genealogy. The chromosome browser and detailed segment view allow for DNA triangulation and easy use with third-party DNA services such as DNA Painter. There's also a new chromosome painter on Family Tree DNA, which gives an ethnicity admixture breakdown view of the chromosomes. But a big standout for Family Tree DNA is the fact that they give you X chromosome information, with the only other company doing that being 23andMe. But where Family Tree really stands out with the X chromosome data is it's the only company where you can filter your match list by people that match on the X chromosome. There are also a few other decent match filters for family tree DNA, such as filtering by longest block and by haplogroup. But unfortunately, that's all of the pros for family tree DNA. One of the things to push it further down on the list is the fact that it's the second smallest database at only 1.77 million people. The shared match comparison page is also pretty terrible. It's basically a filter for the match list, but the only other thing that it gives is the ability to compare the matches in the chromosome browser, which is nice, but there's so much more that could be offered. Family tree DNA also makes it difficult to compare the admixtures with DNA matches, only making this available when in the My Origins window, which makes it really annoying for me because that means I have to have two windows open if I'm trying to go through the match list to identify certain matches that have specific ethnic ancestries in their admixture. Another big negative is that they don't have an in-website messaging system. So you do get an email for each one of your genetic matches, but if that match was up on there 10 years ago and it's an old email and they haven't updated it, then it's going to be really hard to be able to contact that person. Granted, there's a lot of issues with in-messaging systems too, and the best thing would be if they offered both an email and an in-messaging system, but as far as I know, I don't think any company offers that. But this is the only company that doesn't have an in-message system. And in looking at the top 4 of this list, it's the only company that doesn't offer some sort of genetic groups or genetic communities feature, which is one of the few tools that really takes admixture percentages beyond just being kind of a fun guesstimation. In third place is 23andMe. It was kind of a tough decision on whether or not I considered 23andMe to be higher in the list than Family Tree DNA, but there are two main reasons which ended up putting it ahead of Family Tree DNA. The best thing by far about 23andMe is their match comparison page, and it's also the main reason why it beat out Family Tree DNA. When looking at shared matches in this page, it shows how much you both share with the match, which makes a huge difference in trying to determine how a match might be related to you, especially if you have known relatives who have tested in that database. And I'm honestly surprised that there's only 2 websites in this whole list that offer something like this, with MyHeritage being the other one. Part of this feature also indicates if there is any DNA overlap between the 3 of you, directly linking to a chromosome browser comparing your shared segments with each match. This shared match feature is such a big deal to being able to conduct genetic genealogy that I was actually considering for a little bit about pushing them up to 2nd place instead of 3rd. The match review page also gives a family background feature, which gives a place to list family names, ancestral locations, and a place to link a family tree. This feature is a bit difficult to figure out, so I find many who barely fill it out or don't fill it out at all, which is kind of disappointing, but at least it does have that feature. And another thing with the comparison page is that 23andMe has a great ancestry composition comparison and haplogroup comparison, making it easy to quickly compare without having to open multiple windows or click through multiple different pages. This also gets to the point that 23andMe includes paternal and maternal haplogroups as part of the results, with the only other company offering that being Living DNA. The second reason that helped 23andMe beat out Family Tree DNA is that they are the 2nd largest database at 12.8 million profiles, literally more than 10 times the size of Family Tree DNA's database. As a quick aside to that, I'm not quite sure if that includes everyone who has tested or if that's everyone in the database that has allowed their DNA to be compared, because 23andMe is the website that I've noticed more people have tested there who then make their profiles private, so even though they've tested there, it's not going to be matching to anyone in the match list. Basically, there's a large chunk of that 12.8 million figure that's not searchable in the database, which technically brings that down a bit. But 23andMe also has some pretty good advanced tools. The chromosome browser, what they call advanced DNA comparison, is quite good, allowing you to compare up to 5 matches, and you also get X chromosome information. 23andMe also has the family tree feature, which actually guesses where some of your closer DNA matches may fall within your family tree. I think this tool is pretty decent, although I think there's a few things they could do to utilize it a bit better. For one, it'd be nice to see them do something like Family Tree DNA does, where once you link someone in your family tree, then it will try to phase your matches knowing that that person's on a certain side of the family. Which for 23andMe, you have to either have parents or grandparents test to do any sort of phasing. Speaking of which, brings me to the next tool that they have, which is the Grand Tree tool. And this allows you to connect to the DNA kits of your parents and grandparents if they've tested on 23andMe. Once you do that, then you'll be able to go into your match list and you can look at your DNA matches either through a maternal or paternal side. One nice thing 23andMe also has that really isn't super genealogically useful, but very interesting, is they do have a chromosome painter that has a sliding confidence. So what I mean by sliding confidence is that you can look at that based on 50% confidence all the way up to 90%. So when it's 90% confident, you can be much more confident that what it's telling you is correct. It'll just be a lot more vague. 23andMe has a few decent match list filters and sorting, with their number of segments sorting feature being the thing that really sets them apart, but most of the filters are pretty basic and not really useful genealogically. At least I never found them that helpful filtering the match list. But now let's get into the negatives of 23andMe. The big one being the paywall. Some advanced match list search features are only available to some customers and also behind a paywall called 23andMe Plus. For $29 a year, it gives the ability to filter the match list by ancestral population group, haplogroup, and most recently active matches. Basically, who's logged in the most recently. 23andMe Plus is really only worthwhile for the other features offered, which are advanced health reports, but absolutely overpriced if you only care about the genealogy features. Another one of the cons with 23andMe is the fact that they have a 1,500 limit to the genetic matches, which I'm sure some people are thinking, well, 1,500 matches is a lot. Why would you need more than that? Well, for people like myself, I had tens of thousands of matches before that. And it's extremely likely that if you're cutting my matches down significantly, a lot of those matches you're cutting out may hold secrets to helping me solve a genealogical mystery. But the fact that they have this 1,500 match limit really brings down the luster of them being the second largest database, because even if you're the second largest database, what does that matter when I can only match up to 1,500 people from your database? And the last big negative with 23andMe is the fact that they do not allow any uploads, which I think is kind of funny because to me, it makes a lot of sense to allow uploads even if you charge 20, 30 bucks, heck, even charge 50 bucks if you want to upload, just by making it so that people don't have to do another test going through the ordering it, getting it in the mail, doing it, sending it back, hoping it goes in, hoping it gets analyzed right. Instead, if you allow uploads, you probably see a lot of people do it, especially if you charge only 20 or 30 bucks. And then that also increases the database, which then helps them stay high up in the list or possibly even compete with Ancestry. In second place is AncestryDNA, who is a serious heavy hitter in the DNA testing world. The biggest thing that sets AncestryDNA apart from all of the other websites is that they are by far the largest database at 21 million people in the database. And honestly, without the size of their database, they would very likely be much lower in this list. One of Ancestry's best DNA tools is Throughlines, which is also extremely useful for quickly confirming DNA connections and connecting with genetic matches with a proven connection. Throughlines is a tool where you connect your DNA to a family tree you've built, and then Throughlines looks through all the family trees that were built for your genetic matches to see if they can find a possible connection. The only other company with a similar feature is MyHeritage. Ancestry is also constantly rolling out new tools and features, with the most recent being the ethnicity inheritance, breaking up which ethnicities were inherited from each parent, and a chromosome painter similar to 23andMe and FTDNA, but still in the beta stage. So not available for all customers, and the few that I've seen are pretty basic and not that great. Still a lot that they need to work out with it. Ancestry does have high quality match list filters, including custom grouping of matches with correlating colors. And one thing I really like about Ancestry's match list is it marks any matches that are unviewed, making it a lot easier to keep track of which matches I haven't reviewed. Ancestry also allows you to add notes on matches, which I find useful to keep reminders of what I've researched on each match. Sometimes even just a note of, I think this person is related through great-grandpa so-and-so. And a big standout for Ancestry is the fact that they have the best sharing options out of all of the DNA websites. They make it really easy to share your DNA results with multiple users, and I'm not talking about just the ethnicity admixture, but actually being able to share your DNA matches and allow people to go through it and even help manage your DNA kit. There are also tiered options for what access you give to each user. So if you want to share things, but you don't want someone editing stuff, you can give that access. But if you need to give access to someone who's going to be doing a lot of editing and really digging deep, you can give them that as well. Ancestry also gives the ability to manage and access a bunch of DNA kits under one profile, which is extremely helpful for people like myself, where I'm constantly researching all sorts of trees. I have lots of family members who I've had tested through the website, and having these other websites where I have 20 different logins, one for each kit, gets really, really difficult. So allowing that streamlining of one user being able to manage a bunch of kits makes a huge difference. But now for the cons to AncestryDNA. And the big one that has irked a lot of people for a long time is the fact that AncestryDNA does not have a chromosome browser or a way to do triangulation. For years, I've heard people talking about this, and I even made a meme about it recently. This has been something requested by a lot of genetic genealogy users on Ancestry, but something that they have publicly said that they really have no intent of doing, which is pretty disappointing, especially considering that the only other company in this list that doesn't have a chromosome browser is Living DNA. The shared DNA match comparison page is also pretty basic and doesn't give how much DNA your shared matches share with each other. Something that I mentioned before is extremely vital if you're really doing in-depth genealogy. And Ancestry gives no information on the X chromosome. But one of the biggest negatives with Ancestry is that they do not allow uploads. So like I said for 23andMe, they're the only two that don't allow it, which if only they did. Oh man, there's so much genealogy we could do if they just allowed it. But another big negative for Ancestry is the limited access of being able to use some of these DNA tools if you do not have an Ancestry membership. So some of the things that are limited are seeing only 5 generations of a family tree supplied by genetic matches, or seeing up to 5 shared surnames with genetic matches, and limited access to their best tools like through lines. Although I should mention that if you are serious about doing genetic genealogy, Ancestry is one of those sites to really consider getting a membership at. But now, in first place, MyHeritage. I imagine this may be a bit of a surprise to some people, especially those that are more focused on the genetic admixture percentages, because MyHeritage is the one that I probably hear the most complaints about, at least in reference to their ethnicity admixture. But the reality is that MyHeritage has the best website designed to help with genetic genealogy out of these 5 websites where you can buy a DNA test. Honestly, I think the only thing better out there is GEDmatch, but you can't buy a DNA test from them, so they're not in this list. Now, just to be transparent, I do want to mention that MyHeritage has sponsored a previous video of mine, Jewish Pirates one, check it out if you haven't, but that has zero influence on these results. They are not sponsoring this video. There is no sponsor for this video. Although as an aside, if you do want to buy any of these DNA tests, hit my affiliate links down in the description below, because that does help me out. But I just wanted to throw that in there in case there were a few naysayers. To start, MyHeritage has the best match review comparison page out of any website, with the closest being 23andMe, although it's still way ahead of 23andMe's comparison page. The big thing being shared matches show how much DNA you and your genetic match have with the shared match, but MyHeritage also shows if there is overlapping DNA between you and the shared matches. 23andMe also allows you to look at the overlaps, but you have to connect with the relatives on there to be able to do that. So if someone hasn't looked at their 23andMe kit for a long time, you won't be able to see that. MyHeritage also puts a chromosome browser showing the shared segments right on the match review page, which saves time having to click through to see comparison. 23andMe has something similar on their compare page, but it's not quite as in-depth, and you have to go to another page to look at the more in-depth information. But where MyHeritage really surpasses 23andMe's match review page is with the ability to easily share family trees, which can be seen directly on the match review page. There's also a shared ancestral surnames tool and a shared ancestral places tool with a map, which can help in finding correlation between your families to guide research. Another big standout for MyHeritage is their theory of relativity tool, with the only comparable tool on the other websites being Ancestry's through-lines. If you link your DNA test to a tree built on MyHeritage, the theory of relativity tool will compare your tree with that of your genetic matches, but will also find other trees on MyHeritage and Genie, which might help prove the link. I think the theory of relativity tool is better than through-lines because it will show how it is coming up with each theory, sometimes going through many trees to come up with a hypothesis, and sometimes showing many paths of various combinations of different family trees. You can then confirm or reject each theory. And when it comes to the advanced DNA tools on MyHeritage, they far exceed all the other websites on this list. They have my favorite chromosome browser, which allows you to compare up to 7 DNA matches, and I just think it's the easiest and best looking chromosome browser of all of them. The ethnicities map tool is also useful in understanding admixture results, giving the most common ethnicities in certain countries while also showing the most common countries with certain ethnicities. This tool really isn't super genealogically relevant, but it is a little relevant in just helping people understand their admixture, which will then give them a better chance of using the admixture towards genealogy if there is a possibility for that. MyHeritage's match list also has a notes feature and a labels feature somewhat similar to Ancestry, but with MyHeritage you can filter your match list by ethnicity and by genetic groups. This can be especially helpful if you have a trace result or connect to a previously unknown genetic group and you want to review matches with similar results. Basically, imagine if you're mostly European and then you get 3% Jewish DNA, and then you want to look at your matches to see, are there any other matches that have Jewish DNA, and most especially Jewish DNA where it's a large percentage. But the biggest standout of all of MyHeritage's advanced tools, which is something that none of the other websites in this list offer, is the auto cluster. This tool automatically organizes your matches into clusters, which are then visually represented in a graph, with each cluster correlating to a specific branch in your family tree. I should note that you can do auto clusters elsewhere, but MyHeritage is the only one selling DNA tests and offering this tool. One of the unique things about MyHeritage's DNA database is that it has a lot more world coverage because they have shipping centers throughout Europe, which allows more people outside of the typical English-speaking world, which makes up a large percentage of these DNA databases. While MyHeritage is smack dab in the middle of the DNA database size in this list at 6 million, their worldwide shipping network and the ability to upload to their DNA database is giving them a leg up to possibly catch up to 23andMe and give enough time, possibly even Ancestry. Lastly, MyHeritage also allows multiple DNA kits to be managed under one profile, with Ancestry being the only other company to offer something similar, although I should say that Ancestry's feature is a little bit better because you can share each kit with multiple people, whereas MyHeritage, it's really just you looking at it, and then I think you can transfer it to the person whose DNA it is, but I'm not sure if you have the same access. I've never actually done that. Now, for the biggest con with MyHeritage, and unfortunately one of the things that's holding it back the most, is the issues they have with their ethnicity admixture. Although this is part of why it's the #1 spot, because as a con, this is really, really, really low on the list of genealogically relevant tools and doesn't really have much sway on things. While I do think some people go a little bit overboard in their hatred of MyHeritage's ethnicity admixture results, I do wish that they would put out a white paper, especially given the fact that so many people do complain about the results. And then similar to Ancestry, MyHeritage has a lot of their features and tools behind a paywall. Honestly, with MyHeritage being a little bit worse than Ancestry in what they put behind a paywall. So if you don't have a membership, you won't be able to see the trees of your genetic matches, whereas Ancestry gives you 5 generations of your matches tree. MyHeritage gives no access to your shared matches, something Ancestry does not put behind the paywall at all. There's also no shared ancestral locations provided for matches, and all of the advanced tools are not available. And then the last big con with MyHeritage is that they don't have any X chromosome data provided. There is a page on their website which says they plan to have that as a feature coming up sometime in the future, but that at this point it's just in the plans. As DNA testing continues to progress, new tools are rolled out, and the companies expand their websites, it will be exciting to see what innovations each website brings to the table in the future. But speaking of the future, there are some things we do know that we can expect with DNA testing in the future, like rootless hair DNA extraction and being able to extract DNA from items and being able to read more degraded DNA samples. And if you'd like to learn more about this stuff, be sure to check out this video right here.